It was one of those dull, average evenings that don't stand out for any particular reason until they suddenly do. We just finished dinner. Chloe made chicken piccata, one of her go-tos when she didn't want to spend too long in the kitchen. She'd poured us both a glass of wine, though I noticed she barely touched hers. Said she had a long day and wanted a hot shower before curling up for the night. I nodded, said I'd clean up, and kissed her on the cheek as she made her way upstairs. The way her hand brushed my arm on the way out, it felt automatic, like muscle memory, not affection. I started stacking plates in the sink, half listening to the sound of the shower upstairs when her phone buzzed on the counter. Nothing out of the ordinary. Everyone's phone buzzes all the time. I wasn't trying to check her messages, I hadn't even thought about her phone in I don't know how long. That's not the kind of relationship we had, or at least, I thought we didn't. But when the screen lit up, my eyes instinctively glanced at it. Maybe it was the quiet in the kitchen, maybe it was just curiosity, but something made me look. The message was from someone saved as Eli at work. The name meant nothing to me at first. I didn't recall her ever mentioning an Eli. The message itself was simple, borderline casual. Missed yesterday. Same time tomorrow. I remember the feeling in my chest, like a rubber band had been stretched too far and suddenly snapped. It didn't look flirty, and maybe that's what bothered me. There were no emojis, no pet names, no over-the-top winks. It looked ordinary. But the best lies often do. The thing is, Chloe wasn't supposed to be at work the night before. She had told me she was at her mom's house, helping her reorganize old photo albums and pick out things for a yard sale. She even mentioned how dusty it was and how she'd come home smelling like mothballs. But now I'm standing in our kitchen, soap suds on my hands, staring at a message that suggests she was with someone else entirely and that whoever he was, he expected to see her again. I didn't do anything right away. I just stood there, feeling like the ground under me had tilted half a degree off-center. It wasn't proof. Not in the way you could point to and say, this is it, here's the evidence. But it was enough to knock something loose in me. A suspicion, an ache. Something subtle like the first tremor before an earthquake. By the time she came back downstairs, towel wrapped around her damp hair, robe tied loose at the waist, I'd composed myself. Or at least, I thought I had. She looked relaxed, humming softly, something by the XX, I think. She didn't notice anything off in me. Or maybe she did and didn't care. She reached for her phone and I decided to say it carefully like I was asking about the weather. Hey, I said, wiping my hands on a dish towel, who's Eli? She barely paused, just unlocked her screen and shrugged. Oh, he's one of the project managers. We've got these late meetings every week now because of some product launch. He's kind of annoying, keeps double messaging if you don't reply fast enough. Her answer came too easily. There wasn't even a flicker of defensiveness. She didn't over-explain. Didn't stutter. She was calm. Too calm. Oh, I said. Just wondering. I saw the message. She laughed genuinely like she thought I was being silly. You think I'm having some torrid affair with a guy from work named Eli? Then she snorted, walked past me, and opened the fridge. If I were, I'd pick someone taller, she joked. I smiled back, but something inside me pulled away like a turtle retreating into its shell. It wasn't that I believed she was lying in that exact moment. It was that I realized how easily she could. After dinner, we watched a show on Netflix. Or more accurately, we stared at the screen while pretending to be absorbed in the plot. My mind wasn't really in it. I kept glancing at her out of the corner of my eye, noting the way she sat slightly farther from me than usual on the couch. She held her phone with the screen angled just enough that I couldn't see what she was doing, which wasn't unusual until you noticed it. I went upstairs before her that night and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint clicking of her fingers on the phone downstairs. Maybe it was Eli. Maybe it was her mom. Maybe it was someone else entirely. But my mind wouldn't stop turning over that message, wouldn't stop asking why it felt so coded. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, over breakfast, she was her usual self. She wore that light blue blouse I always liked, poured my coffee just how I take it, even asked me about my meeting later that day. She kissed me goodbye. But none of it felt right. And here's the thing I've learned about suspicion, it doesn't come crashing in like a wave. It seeps in like a slow leak, gradually filling every corner of your mind. Once it starts, everything feels like a clue. Every pause in conversation, every late return home, every glance at a screen becomes something to analyze, something to weigh. I started thinking back, trying to remember if she had mentioned this Eli before. Had I just forgotten? Had I brushed it off? Or had she deliberately kept his name from me? I told myself I was probably being paranoid, that maybe I was reading too much into it, but I couldn't shake it. Not just because of the message, but because of how easily she had sidestepped it. And most of all, because deep down, I knew what Chloe looked like when she was telling the truth. This wasn't it. They say hindsight is 20/20, but I think that's too generous. Hindsight's more like a sharp knife you find in your back after convincing yourself it was just a shadow. Once you see it, really see it, every moment you brushed off starts to sting with new meaning. And that's exactly what happened in the days after I saw that message from Eli Work. First, I tried to ignore it. I buried myself in work, told myself I was overthinking things, told myself Chloe wouldn't do something like that. But once that crack formed in my trust, I couldn't stop replaying the little things that hadn't sat right over the past few months. Like how she'd been going into the office more often, even though her company switched to a hybrid model months ago. Most of her coworkers bragged about getting to work from home, but not Chloe. She suddenly loved the structure and insisted she was more productive around her team. I remember thinking it was admirable at the time. Now I wasn't so sure. Then there were the late-night meetings. First, it was once a week, fine. Then twice. Then it became a blur of don't wait up, and we might go late again. I'd fall asleep to the glow of the bedside lamp, her side of the bed empty until 1 or 2 in the morning. And the way she pulled away, that was the worst part. It was subtle, like when she'd sit on the far end of the couch with a pillow between us, or how she'd shift slightly when I touched her shoulder. She used to lean in. Now she leaned out. First, I thought it was stress. Maybe she was overwhelmed. I asked her once if everything was okay between us. She gave me this soft smile, like she appreciated the question, and said, "We're fine, Ree, just tired. That's all." Then she kissed me, quickly, like checking a box, and went back to scrolling on her phone. That's another thing. Her phone. She used to leave it face up on the table, sometimes forget it entirely when we went for a walk. Now, always in her hand or face down on the counter. The notifications were hidden, and she'd lower the screen the second I walked into the room. I'm not dumb. I know people value privacy, but there's a difference between personal space and secrecy. This was secrecy. She also stopped wearing the necklace I gave her. I know how that sounds, like a minor detail, but it wasn't. It was a small silver pendant with our initials engraved on it. I gave it to her on our 3rd anniversary. She wore it for years, almost like a second skin. One day, it just wasn't there. I noticed immediately but didn't say anything. I told myself maybe she forgot. Maybe it broke. A week passed. Then 2. Still nothing. We barely touched anymore. And not in the obvious physical sense, though that too had dwindled to maybe once a month, if that. It was the little stuff. Brushing against each other in the hallway. Sitting with our legs tangled on the couch. Her curling into me during a movie. All of that disappeared. I couldn't remember the last time she held my hand. And the worst part? When I pulled back too, when I started going out more, hitting the gym again, staying late at work. She didn't care. She didn't ask questions. Didn't wonder where I'd been. It was like we were 2 strangers playing house, passing each other in the kitchen and offering polite nods instead of real conversations. There was one moment that hit me harder than I expected. I came home early from work on a Thursday. Just wanted to surprise her. I brought takeout from her favorite Thai spot, even remembered the weird sauce she liked. I walked in through the front door, didn't even call out, just wanted to catch her in one of those natural, unscripted moments. She was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, back to me. I stepped inside and said her name. She jumped. Like, really jumped. Not a startled, "Oh, I didn't hear you" kind of flinch. This was a full-body jolt, like someone caught mid-crime. She snapped the laptop shut so fast I swear the screen trembled. Then she turned around with this wide, unnatural smile and said, "Hey, you're home early." I asked her what she was working on, and she said it was just project notes. I nodded, handed her the food, and we sat down to eat. But the moment had already soured. She barely touched her noodles, kept checking her watch, said she had to hop on a late sync around 9. She went upstairs to take the call. I stayed downstairs and sat in silence. You ever have one of those moments where you realize you're sharing a home with someone who's emotionally a million miles away? That night, the walls of the house felt whiter. The ceilings higher. Like she'd taken her presence with her and left me in an empty shell. That weekend I decided to try something different. I suggested we go out, just the two of us. There was this jazz spot downtown she used to love. I brought it up over breakfast, trying to sound upbeat. She gave me a tight smile and said, "This weekend's crazy, babe. Can we maybe plan for next?" "Sure," I said. "You working again?" She nodded, reached for her coffee, and said something about client turnover and last-minute deliverables. The words felt rehearsed, like lines from a script she'd already run through in her head. I watched her sip her coffee, hair tucked behind one ear, eyes glued to her phone. She looked beautiful. Distant, but beautiful. And that somehow made it worse. Because I still loved her. Still missed her. And she was right there in front of me. That's when the guilt kicked in, not hers. Mine. Because even with all the signs, I still wanted to believe I was wrong. That I was just tired or paranoid or maybe letting the stress of work and life warp my perspective. I kept thinking, "You're not that guy. You're not the guy who checks her phone or tracks her car or accuses her of cheating without proof." But my gut wouldn't let it go. I remember lying in bed one night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how we used to talk. Really talk. About dumb stuff, what animal we'd be in another life, the worst movies we'd ever seen, the smell of her grandfather's garage. Now, the silence between us had weight. It felt deliberate. I thought about that message from Eli. I thought about how he said he missed yesterday. And how Chloe had looked me in the eye and told me she was at her mother's house. That was the moment the puzzle started taking shape. Not just one strange message. Not just a missed dinner or a cold shoulder. All of it together. Each tiny detail I had brushed off before now fit perfectly into the outline of something I didn't want to admit was real. Something was going on. I didn't know how far it went. I didn't know if it was emotional or physical, new or long-standing. But I knew something was off. And I wasn't crazy for seeing it. You can lie with words. You can lie with silence. But your habits? The way your body pulls away instead of leaning in? That's truth. The kind you can't disguise. And the more I watched Chloe, the more I realized I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't building castles of paranoia. I was standing in the ruins of something I hadn't even realized was crumbling. I just didn't know how much farther it would fall. I've heard people say that when you catch someone cheating, it's like your world collapses in a single moment. Like the air gets *Ked out of the room and time stops. That's not how it happened for me. The truth didn't hit me like a sudden slap. It rolled in slowly like a tide I couldn't push back. And by the time I saw it, I wasn't shocked, I was numb. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because it had been one of those strange spring days that started cold but turned warm by noon. I had the windows rolled down on the drive over, coffee in the cup holder, and this vague sense that I needed to do something, anything, to reclaim a little clarity. Chloe had left that morning in her usual rush. She said she had to meet a client early and wouldn't be home until late. Normally, I would have taken that at face value. But things weren't normal anymore. I hadn't really trusted her for weeks, not since that message from Eli. Not since the subtle lies started replacing the real conversations we used to have. I was supposed to be at work, but I couldn't focus. Something inside me had been twisting tighter every day, and I knew I couldn't keep sitting with it. So I made a decision. I told my boss I had a family thing and left the office around lunch. I didn't have a plan. I just drove to her office building. Maybe that sounds obsessive or desperate. Maybe it was. But it didn't feel that way at the time. It felt like survival, like I was slowly drowning and needed to grab onto something solid. Chloe's building is one of those modern glass and steel types that tries to look impressive but ends up feeling cold. I parked a block away and waited in my car. I knew what time she usually took her break, around 1:15. She always said it was her reset time, the moment in her day where she'd grab a coffee, take a short walk, clear her head. I waited. Watched people come and go. The minutes dragged by. Then, around 1:20, I saw her. She was walking toward the corner, her pace casual, almost floaty. She wore that green jacket I always told her made her look like a forest, rich and alive and sharp in all the right ways. But she wasn't alone. There was a man next to her. Tall. Trim. Wearing a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to the elbows. I didn't need a name tag to know who he was. It was Eli. I just knew. They didn't see me. I watched them stop near a gray sedan parked at the curb. Chloe laughed at something he said, really laughed, the kind that scrunches her nose and tilts her head back. She used to laugh like that with me. Then she leaned in. It wasn't subtle. This wasn't a polite hug between colleagues or a friendly shoulder pat. Her arms went around his neck. His hands slid along the small of her back. They held each other like people who had done it before, like they didn't want to let go. And then they kissed. It wasn't a peck. It wasn't accidental. It was long enough that I looked away. Not because I didn't want to see, but because I already had. I didn't need more. I sat there gripping the steering wheel with both hands, my knuckles pale and tight. My heart didn't race. My face didn't flush. There were no fireworks of betrayal exploding in my chest. There was just silence. I had spent weeks questioning myself, second-guessing every hunch, trying to explain away all the changes. And now all those questions dissolved into one clear, irreversible answer. She was cheating on me. Not maybe. Not emotionally. Not there's something off. No. She was in it fully, physically, emotionally. She had stepped out of our relationship and into another one while I was still trying to fix what I thought was just a rough patch. I didn't confront her. I didn't storm across the street or shout her name or demand an explanation. That fantasy version of me, the one who caught the cheater red-handed and made a dramatic scene, didn't show up. Instead, I turned the key in the ignition and pulled away from the curb without looking back. I drove aimlessly for a while, through streets I barely recognized, past stores and parks and neighborhoods that blurred together. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just kept driving. Kept breathing. Kept existing in that quiet space between disbelief and acceptance. Eventually, I ended up in a parking lot overlooking a small lake on the edge of town. I sat on a bench, staring at the water. People jogged past. A kid threw breadcrumbs at ducks. Life went on around me like I wasn't even there. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and looked at our most recent texts. The last thing she had sent me was, "Don't forget to pick up almond milk, smiley face, love you." That message hit harder than anything else. Because she had written love you like it still meant something. Like she hadn't just spent the previous afternoon in another man's arms. Like I wouldn't eventually piece it all together. I don't know how long I sat by the lake. But by the time I got home, it was dusk. The house felt colder than usual. Her coat was hanging on the rack by the door. Her shoes were neatly placed beneath it. There was a half-empty glass of wine on the counter. The scent of her shampoo lingered in the hallway upstairs. And it all felt wrong. That night, she came home late. Said the client meeting went long. Gave me a kiss on the cheek like she always did. I stood there and let it happen, nodding along, playing my part in the illusion she had built. She asked if I wanted to order takeout. I said I wasn't hungry. She didn't push. She never did. I watched her settle onto the couch with her laptop and a blanket, humming softly as she opened an email. She looked peaceful. Content. And that made me sick. I wanted to ask her so many things. When did it start? Did it mean anything? Was I not enough? Was he better? Smarter? Funnier? What did he give you that I didn't? But I didn't say any of that. I didn't say anything at all. Because I already knew the answers wouldn't matter. Nothing she could say would undo what I saw. No amount of explanations or tears or desperate apologies could rewind the moment when I watched her kiss another man on a sunny sidewalk while I sat in my car, invisible to her. So I stayed silent. Not out of fear. Not out of indecision. But because I knew the person I thought I loved didn't exist anymore. The woman in front of me was someone else now, someone who could lie, who could cheat, who could betray without hesitation. I didn't know this version of Chloe. And I didn't want to. That night, while she slept beside me like nothing was wrong, I stared at the ceiling and realized something I hadn't wanted to admit until that moment. This wasn't about catching her. This was about letting go. Letting go of the version of us I had clung to. The future I had mapped out. The home we had built, the routines we followed, the quiet comfort I thought we still shared. It was all gone. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. But soon I would. And when I did, there would be no turning back. After that day, something in me shifted. Not in a dramatic, movie scene kind of way. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no slammed doors. What changed was quieter, internal, personal. A withdrawal not from the relationship itself, but from the illusion of it. I didn't say anything to Chloe. Not that night. Not the next day. Not the day after that. She went about her usual routines as if nothing had changed. Morning coffee. Rushed makeup in the bathroom. Forgotten earrings on the nightstand. Casual kisses on her way out the door. She still texted me things like, "Hope your meeting goes well," or "Want sushi tonight?" I still replied. Still said thanks or sure. But inside, I had already started to disappear. And the strangest thing? She didn't notice. That first week after I saw her with Eli, I studied her like a stranger might. I watched how she smiled when her phone buzzed, how her fingers typed quickly before she tucked it away. I noticed the way she wore her hair differently when she left for work. Looser, softer. perfume on days when she used to skip it. I'd catch her glancing at the mirror before she stepped out, fixing strands of hair that didn't need fixing. I didn't follow her, didn't go through her phone. I didn't need to. The knowing wasn't the problem anymore. The betrayal had already happened. What I needed now was space, to figure out what to do with the wreckage she didn't know she'd left behind. So I started pulling away, not in obvious ways. I didn't start fights or lock myself in a separate room. I just stopped reaching. I stopped asking how her day went, stopped initiating movie nights or suggesting dinners out. I let the space between us grow naturally, like vines left untamed. And she didn't resist. If anything, she leaned into the distance. There were fewer questions from her, too. She stopped checking if I'd eaten, stopped nudging me when I stayed quiet through dinner. She no longer asked about my work projects or brought me coffee when I worked late. The routines fell apart, one subtle thread at a time. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't a declaration. It was a slow, mutual unbraiding. At night, I'd lie awake beside her, listening to her breathing and wondering how many nights she'd spent sleeping beside me while her mind was somewhere else, somewhere with Eli. I'd glance at her phone glowing softly on the nightstand, her screen lighting up with notifications I pretended not to notice. She still had him saved as Eli Work, which almost made me laugh. Still keeping up the act. Still pretending I didn't know. One morning, I woke up early and went for a run. Something I hadn't done in years. I didn't plan it. I just woke up before the alarm, got out of bed quietly, laced up my old sneakers, and stepped outside before the sun came up. It was cold, and my lungs burned. But I ran anyway. It became a habit. Every morning while Chloe slept, I ran. Through side streets, around the park, past shuttered cafes and sleepy neighborhoods. I'd come home sweating, sore, but with a strange clarity I hadn't felt in months. Like I was returning to a version of myself I'd misplaced. Someone with direction, even if he didn't yet know where he was going. Chloe didn't notice at first. Maybe she thought I was going through a fitness phase. Or maybe she didn't care. But eventually she made a comment. "You're looking lean lately," she said one night, curling up under a blanket while I stood folding laundry. "What's that about?" I shrugged. "Just felt like running." She nodded and went back to scrolling on her phone. That was it. I started going back to the gym, too. I changed my diet, cut back on alcohol, made plans with old friends I hadn't seen in a while. I reactivated my Spotify account and started listening to music again. Really listening, not just background noise to K***LL silence. I filled the gaps that had grown in me, and all of it was happening under her nose. She still smiled at me in the mornings, still said "love you" at the end of texts, but there was something robotic about it now, like she was checking boxes, trying to maintain an image of a relationship that had already ended in practice, if not in name. One Saturday afternoon, she found me out back, fixing the old fence I'd been putting off for months. She brought out a pitcher of lemonade, something she hadn't done in a long time, and stood beside me. "Want help?" she asked. I shook my head, still hammering nails. "I'm good." She lingered a few seconds, then set the pitcher down and went back inside. It hit me then that she was beginning to feel it. That shift. She was starting to sense that something was different, but she couldn't name it. Probably thought I was pulling away because of something she'd done wrong in the moment, not realizing I was reacting to a truth she hadn't confessed but I'd already seen with my own eyes. I started sleeping better, oddly enough. Not because I felt at peace, but because I had stopped torturing myself with questions. I had made peace with the fact that I would never get the apology I wanted, never hear the truth straight from her. I wasn't waiting for a breakdown or an admission anymore. I was just waiting to be ready. There was a moment, maybe 10 days after I saw her with Eli, where she stood in the doorway of our bedroom just watching me. I was reading. Her expression was hard to read. She didn't say anything. Just stood there, like she was trying to figure out if something was wrong. I looked up and gave her a nod. She left without a word. That night, I started packing a small bag. Just a few things: a toothbrush, some clothes, a journal, a spare phone charger. I didn't know when I'd leave, but I knew I would. I remember thinking, I don't want revenge. I don't want to make her cry or feel what I felt. I just want to reclaim my dignity. Quietly. Completely. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about not punishing myself anymore by staying. There's a specific kind of power in choosing silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the kind that comes from knowing you don't owe anyone a scene. I had always thought closure meant a conversation, a confrontation, maybe even an apology. But that wasn't the kind of closure I wanted anymore. I wanted the kind that came from walking away without begging to be seen. The kind that said, I know who I am now even if you never really did. Each day I felt a little stronger. A little clearer. I wasn't healed, not yet, but I had stopped bleeding. The wound was turning into a scar. And she didn't even realize I was leaving her in slow motion. She still cooked dinner sometimes. Still suggested we watch a movie. Still laughed at old stories like they meant something. But her eyes were watching me differently now. She was starting to wonder. She didn't know what I'd seen. Didn't know that every "I love you" she whispered now sounded hollow in my ears. That every time she typed away on her phone while I sat beside her, I was thinking of the day I'd watched her kiss someone else. The distance between us wasn't painful anymore. It was protective. A boundary. A line I wasn't crossing again, not emotionally, not mentally, not physically. And maybe she was starting to feel it. But by the time she fully understood, I knew I'd already begun. It started with soup. I came home from the gym one evening, tired and soaked in sweat, and Chloe was in the kitchen making soup from scratch. She never made soup from scratch. Hell, she hadn't cooked anything more complex than scrambled eggs in weeks. The house smelled like garlic and thyme. The radio was on low, playing one of those playlists we used to listen to when we first moved in together. Hey, she said, turning with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Figured I'd make your favorite. Chicken noodle, the way your mom used to. I paused in the doorway, duffel bag over my shoulder. Thanks, I said, careful to keep my tone flat. She looked nervous. Stirring the pot like it was an exam she hadn't studied for. She glanced over her shoulder at me twice, like she wanted to say something, but didn't. I dropped my bag by the stairs and went up to shower. When I came back down, the table was set. 2 bowls. Cloth napkins. Even the nice wine glasses. It felt like a setup, like someone trying to recreate something long dead and hoping nostalgia would do the rest. We ate mostly in silence. She asked about my day. I gave her short answers. She complimented my new haircut, which I'd gotten over a week ago. I didn't call her out on that. By the time she was clearing the table, I could feel her watching me more closely than usual. I think she was trying to gauge whether her sudden effort was working. It wasn't. Over the next few days, it became obvious something had shifted in her now. She was picking up on the new dynamic even if she didn't fully understand it yet. My silence wasn't angry anymore. It was calm. Detached. She could feel it. She started trying harder. She'd play songs we used to love on the speakers while she cooked or folded laundry. She wore the necklace I gave her, the one she'd stopped wearing months ago. She asked if I wanted to go for a walk after dinner, then offered to drive us to the park where we used to watch sunsets in the early days. I said I was tired. She smiled and nodded, but I could see the flicker of something, hurt, maybe, or doubt. Like she was beginning to suspect the damage went deeper than she had realized. One night, she crawled into bed after me, snuck under the covers, and pressed her cold feet against mine. It used to be a thing, something she did to mess with me. Normally, I jump and laugh and pull her closer. This time, I didn't move. After a few seconds, she whispered, I miss this. I kept my eyes closed. I know I've been distracted lately, she said. But I don't want us to drift. I nodded slowly, still silent. I could feel her waiting for me to say something back. Anything. But I didn't. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I couldn't fake it anymore. She turned away eventually. I lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. From that point on, her efforts doubled. She started texting me during the day, things she hadn't sent in months. Random check-ins. Memes she thought I'd like. Once she texted, do you remember that coffee shop in Asheville we loved? We should go back. Just the 2 of us. Get out of town for a weekend. I didn't reply until hours later. Yeah. Maybe. The next morning, I found a small sticky note on the bathroom mirror. You looked peaceful in your sleep. I love you. I always have. It should have touched me. Maybe it would have once. But now all I saw was someone trying to resuscitate something after the damage was done, after she'd already pulled the plug herself. There's this phrase that kept looping in my mind, too little, too late. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I wasn't bitter. That surprised me even more. What I felt was something colder. A kind of emotional indifference that only shows up after you've grieved someone who's still alive. I watched her trying though. I did. She'd dress up more around the house. Wear her hair the way I always liked. She pulled old photo albums from the closet and left them on the coffee table. She'd flip through them in the evenings, laughing softly to herself, hoping I'd look too. I didn't. She made my favorite meals. Lasagna on Monday. Steak and mashed potatoes on Thursday. The little chocolate mousse cups from that bakery downtown. And I ate them all politely. Told her thank you. Washed my dishes. But never once gave her what she was really after, warmth. She wanted reassurance that she still had access to my heart. But I had changed the locks weeks ago. One night, we watched a movie together. Or she watched and I sat there with a 1,000-yard stare. Halfway through, she leaned over and rested her head on my shoulder. I didn't move away. But I didn't lean into it either. I just sat there rigid. After a few minutes, she whispered, "I miss us." It was the first time in a long while she'd said anything that direct. Her voice was soft, but cracked at the end. I looked at the TV. Then at her. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Me too." But I didn't mean it the way she wanted. She didn't know the version of us I missed was already buried. That what I grieved wasn't her, but the man I used to be when I believed her. The man who looked forward to coming home. Who bought her surprise gifts just because. Who trusted her without needing to check her phone or second-guess her stories. He was gone now. She didn't cry that night, but I could tell she was close. She stayed silent the rest of the movie, her hand resting lightly on my leg. It stayed there for 20 minutes. I didn't hold it. The following weekend, she suggested a day trip. Said there was this trail she wanted to hike, just us, no phones, no work. Said we could pack a lunch and maybe talk. Really talk, she emphasized. I agreed. Not because I wanted to reconnect, but because I needed to be sure. I needed to see what she'd say if I gave her space to explain herself. To own what she'd done. To tell me the truth. We drove in silence most of the way. The trees blurred past. She made a playlist full of songs we used to dance to in the kitchen. I didn't say much. Just listened. Halfway up the trail, we stopped for water. She sat on a fallen log, looked out at the trees, and said, "You've changed." I nodded. "Yeah." She hesitated. "Is it, me?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. She wasn't the same either. There was something more fragile in her now. A restlessness in her hands. Like she was on the edge of confessing or collapsing, but couldn't decide which. "You tell me," I said. She stared at the ground. "I know I haven't been present. Lately. I've had a lot on my mind." "Like what?" She opened her mouth. Closed it. Then said, "Work. Pressure. Us." She wouldn't say his name. Wouldn't admit what I'd seen. And that told me everything. She wanted to repair things without acknowledging the break. Wanted to rebuild on top of a lie. But I'd already seen the crack in the foundation. And I wasn't about to build on it again. We finished the hike. She held my hand on the way down. I let her. That night, she curled up next to me in bed, her head on my chest. I stared at the ceiling. She whispered, "I don't want to lose you." I didn't respond. Because she already had. Chloe kept trying, like she was clawing her way back to something already gone. Midday texts. Little notes on the fridge. Even bought tickets to a concert we once said we'd go to someday. I thanked her. Smiled. But I didn't feel it. I came home late, left early. Our lives moved side by side, not together. She was suddenly full of effort, but every gesture just reminded me how long she'd been absent. Her attention felt more like guilt than love. I'd already done my grieving. She was just starting hers. 2 weeks later, I packed in silence while she was out. No dramatics, just methodical, quiet closure. I left a note. Just a few lines. "I saw everything. You don't need to explain. I've already left you 1,000 times in my head. This is just the first time with my feet." I didn't answer her calls. Didn't respond to her texts. I spent the next few days alone in a lakeside cabin, letting the stillness remind me of who I was before her. For once, the silence didn't ache, it healed.